The transport shuttle rattled worse than Dorothy Reed's old delivery van back on Earth. She clutched her husband's recipe book to her chest and watched through the small window as Drakenhold Station grew larger against the darkness of space. 72 years of living had taught her that new beginnings always came with a bit of turbulence. First time on a frontier station, grandmother. The pilot glanced back at her. First time off Earth, actually. Dorothy smiled. My children thought I was crazy. Said I should retire somewhere quiet. Well, Drakenhold is definitely not quiet. The pilot's expression turned serious. You've been briefed about the dragon situation? Dorothy nodded. She had read the warnings. Territorial, fire-breathing creatures. Aggressive towards all visitors. Multiple failed diplomatic attempts. The station administrators only allowed civilians in the protected habitation zones, far from the ruins the dragons guarded so fiercely. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang. Dorothy gathered her 2 suitcases, both filled mostly with kitchen supplies, and stepped into the station. The habitation zone looked like any other space settlement. Gray walls, flickering lights, and people rushing about with worried faces. A young administrator met her at the gate. Mrs. Reed? I'm supposed to show you to your quarters. Please stay within the marked safe zones. We've had 3 security incidents this week alone. They walked through narrow corridors. Dorothy could hear raised voices from the command center. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed screens showing massive winged shapes circling near the lower levels of the station. That's them, the administrator said quietly. The Scorchwings. Beautiful creatures, really. Shame they want to kill anyone who gets too close to the ruins. Dorothy's quarters were small but clean. A single room with a bed, a desk, and most importantly, a tiny kitchen unit. After the administrator left, she began unpacking. Out came her pots and pans, her measuring cups, the small container of cinnamon she had brought from Earth. Each item found its place like old friends settling into a new home. Through the thin walls, she could hear her neighbors arguing about evacuation plans. The Galactic Council was losing patience. If the dragon problem could not be solved, Drakenhold would be abandoned. All the research, all the potential discoveries in those ancient ruins would be lost. Dorothy opened her husband's recipe book. Gerald had been gone for 5 years now, but his handwriting still made her smile. She flipped to the page for simple wheat bread. Some things never changed, no matter how far from home you traveled. Bread was bread, whether baked on Earth or in the stars. She measured flour into a bowl. The familiar motions calmed her mind. Knead, fold, knead again. Her grandmother had taught her mother had taught her, and she had taught her own children. Now here she was, making bread in space because sitting idle had never suited her. The dough rose slowly in the temperature-controlled environment. Dorothy tidied her small space and then shaped the loaves. Into the oven they went. Within minutes, the scent of baking bread filled her quarters. She was washing her hands when the station alarms began to wail. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Through her window, Dorothy could see security personnel running with weapons drawn. The intercom crackled to life. All civilians remain in your quarters. Dragons are approaching the habitation zone. This is not a drill. Dorothy dried her hands and checked her bread. Another 10 minutes needed. She sat down calmly and waited. The alarms continued. She could hear heavy footsteps and shouting. Someone ran past her door yelling about evacuation protocols. But Dorothy stayed seated, watching her oven timer count down. When the bread was done, she pulled the golden loaves out and set them on the counter to cool. The scent intensified, filling every corner of her small room. Sweet and warm and comforting. The alarm stopped. Dorothy moved to her window and looked out. In the dim light of the station's exterior, she could see 3 massive shapes. Dragons. They hovered near the air circulation vents, their great wings moving slowly. But they were not attacking. They were not breathing fire or roaring threats. They were just floating there, their heads turning as if searching for something. One of them, the largest with dark red scales, moved closer to the habitation zone. Security forces raised their weapons, but the dragon made no aggressive moves. It simply hung in the air, its nostrils flaring. Dorothy understood then. She had seen that look before, on the faces of her grandchildren when they visited and smelled her cooking, on strangers passing by her bakery, on her husband coming home after a long day. Hunger, not for food exactly, but for something deeper, for comfort, for memory, for home. She cut a slice from one of the loaves and took a bite. Still warm, with a perfect crust, Gerald would have approved. The dragon outside tilted its massive head, as if watching her through the window. Dorothy finished her bread and began planning tomorrow's menu. She had a feeling her neighbors were going to need more than simple wheat loaves. Perhaps some cinnamon rolls, maybe vegetable soup. She would have to check what ingredients the station stores carried. Outside, the three dragons remained for another hour before slowly flying back toward the ruins. Security forces watched them go, confused and relieved. No one had been hurt. No damage had been done. The dragons had simply come, lingered near the habitation zone, and left peacefully in her quarters. Dorothy Reed cleaned her kitchen and prepared for bed. She had traveled across space to start fresh, to find purpose in her remaining years. She had not expected to find it quite so soon or in such an unusual form. But then again, she had learned long ago that the best recipes often came from unexpected ingredients. Dorothy woke before dawn, a habit from 50 years of running a bakery. The station's artificial lights had not yet shifted to their daytime setting. She moved quietly through her small kitchen, gathering ingredients for cinnamon rolls. The dough needed time to rise, so she started early. Flour, sugar, yeast, milk powder from the station stores. She had found butter substitute that would work well enough. As she kneaded the dough, she hummed an old song from her childhood. The melody echoed softly in the empty room that by the time other residents began stirring, Dorothy had 36 cinnamon rolls cooling on her counter. The sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar filled not just her quarters, but drifted into the corridor through the ventilation system. She was glazing the rolls when someone knocked urgently on her door. Mrs. Reed, it was the station commander, a tall woman with tired eyes. We need to talk about yesterday. Dorothy invited her in and offered her a cinnamon roll. The commander accepted, taking a cautious bite before her expression softened. These are incredible, she admitted. But that's not why I'm here. The dragons behaved strangely yesterday. Our sensors detected them near the habitation zone for over an hour. They've never done that before without attacking. They were curious, Dorothy said simply, glazing another roll. Curious about what? The smell, I think. I was baking bread. The commander stared at her. You think fire-breathing dragons were attracted by bread? My grandchildren always could smell my baking from 3 blocks away. Dorothy smiled. I suppose dragons have good noses too. The commander left looking unconvinced, but she took 6 cinnamon rolls with her. Dorothy packed the remaining rolls into a large basket. She covered them with a clean cloth and walked to the nearest observation point, an area with reinforced windows looking out toward the ruins. Security personnel watched her nervously as she approached the external airlock. Ma'am, you cannot go outside the safe zone, one guard said. I'm not going outside. I am simply placing this basket in the airlock area. The dragons can reach it through the external door. That's still against protocols. Dorothy looked at the young guard. He could not have been older than her youngest grandson. Son, those creatures have been alone out there for who knows how long. Someone should at least try being neighborly. She placed the basket down and returned to her quarters before anyone could stop her properly. For the rest of the morning, Dorothy went about her business. She unpacked more of her belongings, arranged her small living space, and read through Gerald's recipe book. Around midday, curiosity got the better of her. She walked back to the observation point. The basket was gone. Security footage showed 3 dragons had approached just after dawn. They had circled the basket cautiously for nearly 20 minutes before the largest one, the dark red dragon from yesterday, had carefully picked it up in its claws and carried it away. No aggression, no fire, just careful, deliberate movements. Word spread quickly through the station. By evening, Dorothy had visitors. Scientists wanted to study her baking. Linguists asked if she had noticed any patterns in dragon behavior. The station commander returned, this time asking permission to document everything Dorothy did. I'm just cooking, Dorothy told them all. same as I have done for 50 years. But she agreed to let them observe. If it helped people understand the dragons better, she saw no harm in it. That night, Dorothy prepared a larger meal. Roasted vegetables from the station's hydroponics bay, herb bread using dried seasonings, and berry pies made with frozen fruit from storage. She worked steadily, efficiently, the way she had done when feeding her 5 children and their endless parade of friends. She placed the food in the same spot as before, in containers that the dragons could easily open. This time, she included a handwritten note on paper from her journal, "For my new neighbors. I hope you enjoy this." The scientists monitoring the area reported that the dragons arrived within an hour. All 3 of them this time, plus 2 smaller ones. They consumed everything, even licking the containers clean. The largest dragon found the note, held it carefully in its claws, and seemed to study it for a long time before folding it gently and taking it away. Dorothy established a routine. Every morning and evening, she cooked. Sometimes simple meals, sometimes elaborate ones, depending on what ingredients she could source. She left the food in the same location. The dragons came regularly to collect it. On the 5th day, Dorothy found something waiting for her at the observation point. A pile of crystalline stones, each one perfectly smooth and glowing with inner light. They were arranged in a careful circle, like an offering. She picked one up. It was warm to the touch and beautiful. She carried them all back to her quarters and displayed them on her windowsill where the light could catch them. That evening, she made Gerald's special stew recipe, the one he had created during their first year of marriage, combining vegetables and herbs in a way that made the house smell like love itself. She had not made it since he died, but somehow it felt right to make it now. She left the large pot at the observation point as the sun set on Drakenhold's artificial day cycle. An hour later, she heard something at her door. Not a knock, but a scraping sound. Dorothy opened it cautiously. The largest dragon sat on the platform just outside her quarters, its massive form barely fitting in the space. Up close, she could see the intelligence in its golden eyes, the careful way it held itself to avoid damaging the station structure. Dorothy was not afraid. Fear had never been her first response to anything. She stepped outside slowly, meeting the dragon's gaze. "Hello," she said softly. "I am Dorothy." The dragon rumbled deep in its chest, a sound like distant thunder. It lowered its great head slightly, and Dorothy recognized the gesture. Acknowledgement. Respect. She went back inside and returned with 2 bowls of stew. She sat down on her doorstep and began to eat. After a moment's hesitation, the dragon carefully accepted the other bowl. Eating stew with a dragon turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. The creature, which Dorothy learned from the scientists was called HFY by the research team, ate slowly and carefully. It made soft, rumbling sounds between bites, almost like purring. Dorothy talked while they ate. She told HFY about Earth, about her bakery, about Gerald, and how he had loved trying new recipes. She spoke about her children scattered across different planets, about her grandchildren she rarely saw anymore. The dragon listened, its golden eyes never leaving her face. When the bowls were empty, HFY touched its snout gently to Dorothy's hand before spreading its massive wings and gliding back toward the ruins. Dorothy sat on her doorstep for a long time after, thinking about loneliness and how it looked the same regardless of species. The next morning, 2 more dragons appeared at her door. Younger ones, with brighter scales and more energetic movements. They brought gifts, unusual flowers that grew in the caves, fragments of ancient metal worked into beautiful patterns. Dorothy accepted each offering with thanks and gave them fresh bread in return. By the end of the week, Dorothy's evening meals had become a gathering. 5 dragons came regularly, sitting in the space outside the habitation zone while Dorothy brought out food and sat with them. She learned their individual preferences. HFY liked hearty stews. The younger dragons preferred sweet things. An older female with gray scales enjoyed anything with herbs. Station residents watched from windows, amazed. The creatures that had terrorized security forces for months now sat peacefully, eating homemade meals and listening to an elderly woman's stories. scientists tried to replicate Dorothy's success. They offered food using mechanical dispensers, played recordings of human voices, even attempted to copy her recipes exactly. The dragons ignored all of it. They only accepted food from Dorothy's hands, only gathered when she was present. They don't want efficiency, Dorothy explained to a frustrated research team. They want connection. Anyone can leave food out. I sit with them. I talk to them. I see them as individuals, not as research subjects or security threats. The station commander authorized Dorothy to spend more time with the dragons. It was the first positive contact anyone had achieved. Other species representatives asked to join the meals, but the dragons grew agitated when strangers approached. Dorothy had to politely ask the observers to keep their distance. Trust takes time, she told the disappointed diplomats. You cannot rush grief. Grief? The commander looked confused. What makes you think they're grieving? Dorothy had wondered about this herself. The way Ashwing sometimes stared at the stars. How the older dragons moved with such weariness. The careful way they treated her notes and gifts. As if such kindness was something they had lost long ago. One evening, after the meal was finished and the other dragons had left, Ashwing remained. The great dragon stood and walked slowly toward the ruins. Then it paused and looked back at Dorothy, clearly waiting. You want me to follow you? Dorothy asked. Ashwing rumbled affirmatively. Dorothy informed security of what she was doing, ignoring their protests, and followed the dragon. They passed through areas of the station that had been abandoned due to dragon attacks. Scorch marks still decorated the walls. Ashwing moved carefully, ensuring Dorothy could keep up with its much larger stride. They descended into the lower levels where the ruins began. Ancient stone architecture merged with the station's metal framework. The air grew warmer. Dorothy could see other dragons watching from alcoves and high perches, their eyes reflecting in the dim light. Ashwing led her to a massive chamber carved from stone. The walls were covered in murals, preserved perfectly by the dry cave air. Dorothy caught her breath. The paintings showed dragons, but they were not alone. Another species stood beside them, smaller beings with 4 limbs and gentle faces. They were cooking together over fires, sharing meals. The images depicted harmony, cooperation, joy. Your friends, Dorothy whispered. You had friends once. Ashwing made a sound like a mournful song. The dragon moved to another section of the wall where the murals showed the other species leaving. Ships ascending to the stars. Dragons watching from below, waiting, always waiting. Dorothy reached out and touched the ancient stone. They left you behind, and you have been guarding their memory ever since. The dragon lowered its massive head, and Dorothy saw something she had not expected. Tears, glowing faintly in the darkness, running down scaled cheeks. She put her hand on Ashwing's snout. I understand loneliness. I understand waiting for someone who will not return, but you do not have to be alone anymore. Ashwing's rumble echoed through the chamber. Other dragons emerged from the shadows, drawn by the sound. They gathered around Dorothy, this small human who smelled like comfort and spoke with kindness. Some were ancient, their scales dulled with age. Others were young, hatched long after the friends had departed, but raised on stories of better times. Dorothy looked at them all, these magnificent creatures who had been alone for so long they had forgotten how to trust. I cannot replace who you lost, but I can be here now. I can share meals with you. I can listen to your stories, even if I do not fully understand them yet. The dragons began to sing. It started with Ashwing, a deep, resonant tone that spoke of sorrow and hope. Others joined, creating a harmony that made the cave walls vibrate. Dorothy did not know what the song meant, but she felt its emotion. Grief acknowledged, isolation ending, a door opening to something new. When the song faded, Ashwing gently picked Dorothy up in its claws and carried her back to the habitation zone. The dragon set her down carefully at her door as security forces rushed forward. It is fine, Dorothy assured them. We are just starting to understand each other. That night, Dorothy wrote in her journal about the murals, about the lost friends, about the dragon's long wait. She wondered what had happened to that other species, why they had never returned. But mostly she thought about how to help the dragons move forward while honoring their past. Tomorrow, she decided she would cook something special, a feast that celebrated both remembrance and new beginnings. Dorothy spent 3 days preparing for what she called her friendship feast. She gathered ingredients from the station stores, traded some of her crystalline gifts for rare spices, and even convinced the hydroponics team to grow special herbs. The station commander, seeing an opportunity for real diplomatic progress, authorized additional resources. This meal needs to honor both the past and the present, Dorothy explained to her growing team of helpers. Several station residents had volunteered to assist, moved by her mission. We celebrate the friends they lost while welcoming the connections they are building now. She taught them how to cook with intention, not just following recipes, but putting care into every step. A young engineering student learned to knead bread properly. A security officer discovered he had a talent for seasoning soups. An alien botanist contributed dishes from her own culture, and Dorothy showed her how to adapt them for dragon tastes. The observation deck was transformed. Tables were arranged in a wide circle, each set with simple but dignified place settings. Dorothy used her own cloth napkins from Earth, washed and pressed carefully. Lanterns provided warm lighting. The smell of dozens of dishes filled the air. Dragons began arriving at sunset. Ashwing came first, followed by the regular group Dorothy had been feeding. Then others emerged from the ruins, dragons she had never seen before. Older ones with scars and wisdom in their eyes. Younger ones barely large enough to fly properly. They filled the space. Curious but cautious, station representatives arrived too. The commander, the science team, diplomats from 3 different species. Dorothy had insisted on limited numbers. Too many strangers will frighten them, she had warned. We start small. Dorothy stood in the center and welcomed everyone. Thank you for coming. Tonight we share food and stories. No research. No negotiations. Just a meal between neighbors. She had prepared dishes from Earth's many cultures. Italian pasta, because it reminded her of feeding her large family. Spiced rice from Gerald's favorite restaurant. Roasted vegetables that the dragons particularly enjoyed. Fresh bread, always bread, because it was universal somehow. And desserts, lots of desserts, because sweetness helped difficult conversations. The meal began quietly. Dragons and station residents eyed each other uncertainly. But Dorothy moved between the tables, serving food personally, encouraging conversation. She told stories about each dish, where it came from, who had taught her to make it. This pasta recipe came from my husband's grandmother, she said, spooning it onto plates. She taught me during our first year of marriage. I burned it 7 times before getting it right. Gerald ate every failed attempt and told me it was delicious. Ashwing rumbled. A sound the linguist was learning meant amusement. Other dragons made similar noises. Dorothy realized they were laughing to a young dragon, curious and bold, approached the alien botanist. The botanist, trembling, offered a piece of her culture's traditional flatbread. The dragon sniffed it carefully, then ate it in one bite. It made a pleased sound and moved closer, asking for more. Barriers began to crumble. A security officer shared his soup with an elderly dragon. The engineering student found herself explaining human technology to 2 fascinated younger dragons. The linguist started recording dragon vocalizations, finally having cooperative subjects. Dorothy brought out the main course, her husband's special roast that took hours to prepare properly. The scent made every dragon in the room pause and inhale deeply. She served Ashwing first, then the oldest dragons, following the respect hierarchy she had observed in their interactions. This was Gerald's masterpiece, Dorothy said softly to Ashwing. He made it for every important occasion. Birthdays, anniversaries, celebrations. He believed food brought people together better than anything else in the universe. Ashwing ate slowly, savoring each bite. Then the great dragon did something unexpected. It began to sing. Not the mournful sound from the caves, but something different, melodic. The other dragons joined in, their voices creating layers of harmony. The linguist gasped. That's their gratitude song. It is ancient. They sing it to honor those who show them kindness. Dorothy felt tears in her eyes. She had not cried since Gerald's funeral, but this moment broke through her careful composure. These magnificent creatures, alone for so long, were singing for her. When the song ended, Ashwing approached the linguist. The dragon made a series of careful sounds, clearly attempting communication. The linguist listened intently, her translation device working to process the musical language. Ashwing says, the linguist's voice shook with excitement, that you remind them of the old friends. Not in appearance, but in spirit. The friends brought food and fellowship. They sat with dragons as equals. They listened to dragon songs and shared their own stories. Dorothy nodded. What happened to them? Why did they leave? The linguist translated the question. Ashwing's response was long and complex, taking several minutes. The other dragons listened quietly, many making sad sounds. They were called away by a great crisis. The linguist finally translated. Their homeworld needed them. They promised to return, but they never did. The dragons waited for generations. Eventually, they understood their friends were gone, but they could not abandon the ruins. These caves hold the only remaining records of that friendship. The murals, the gifts, the memories. The dragons became guardians, protecting what was left, until they forgot how to trust anyone new. Dorothy said quietly. Ashwing rumbled agreement. The dragon then made more sounds, and the linguist smiled through her own tears. Ashwing says you have taught them something important. That waiting for the past to return means missing the present. That new friends do not replace old ones, but honor them by continuing the tradition of connection. Dorothy stood and addressed all the dragons. I cannot bring back who you lost. No one can, but humans understand loyalty and memory. We will not ask you to forget your friends. We will help you remember them properly while building something new together. The feast continued late into the night. By the time it ended, 3 dragons had agreed to work with the science team. 2 more volunteered to help security understand the ruins better. The youngest dragons asked if Dorothy would teach them about human culture as everyone departed. Ashwing remained behind with Dorothy. The dragon touched its snout to her hand gently, then spread its wings and flew toward the ruins. But this time, it did not look like a lonely guardian returning to an empty vigil. That it looked like someone going home, knowing friends would be there tomorrow. 3 months after the friendship feast, Drakenhold Station had transformed into something no one had imagined possible. Dorothy stood in what used to be an abandoned cargo bay, now converted into a massive communal kitchen and dining hall. Dragons and various species worked side by side, preparing meals and sharing techniques. Grandmother Dorothy, is this temperature correct for the bread? A young dragon named Silverscale asked, carefully monitoring the oven with its snout. Dorothy checked the settings. Perfect. You have a natural talent for baking. Silverscale beamed with pride, expression that involved a lot of teeth, but had become endearing to the station residents. The dragon had become Dorothy's most dedicated student, spending hours learning recipes and cooking methods. The ruins beneath the station were now accessible to researchers, but only with dragon guides. Ashwing had established strict protocols. Scientists could study and document everything, but they had to treat the ancient site with respect. Several important discoveries had already been made, including a complete library of the lost civilization's history. Dorothy walked through the dining hall, checking on various cooking stations. A security officer and an elderly dragon were collaborating on a soup recipe. The alien botanist taught 3 young dragons about hydroponics. The linguist sat in a corner, now fluent in dragon speech, recording stories from the oldest dragons for preservation. The station commander approached Dorothy with someone new, a dignified alien with silver skin and multiple arms. Mrs. Reed, this is Ambassador Sylvan from the Galactic Council. They have traveled a long way to meet you. Dorothy wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. Welcome, Ambassador. Have you eaten? I have fresh rolls. Sylvan accepted a roll with one hand while shaking Dorothy's hand with another. Mrs. Reed, the Council has been monitoring the situation here with great interest. What you have accomplished is unprecedented. We have spent decades trying to establish peaceful contact with isolated species. You did it with cooking and patience. I just treated them like neighbors, Dorothy said simply. That is precisely why the council wants your help. Sylvan pulled out a data pad. There are 47 species currently isolated from the galactic community. Most are aggressive or fearful of outsiders. Traditional diplomatic methods have failed. We believe your approach could succeed where others have not. Dorothy felt suddenly tired. She was 72 years old. She had come to Drakenhold to live out her remaining years in peace, not to become some kind of galactic ambassador. I appreciate the offer, but I am just a cook. I am not a diplomat. You are exactly what we need, Sylvan insisted. Not a politician or a scientist, but someone who understands the value of simple kindness and shared meals. The council is prepared to establish a cultural exchange program based on your methods. We want you to train others, to share what you have learned. Ashwing entered the hall, immediately sensing Dorothy's discomfort. The dragon moved protectively to her side. What does Ashwing think? Dorothy asked the linguist. The linguist conversed with Ashwing briefly, then translated. Ashwing says the choice is yours, but the dragons will support you either way. However, Ashwing also says that your gift should not be kept here alone. Other lonely species deserve the chance to find connection, as the dragons did. Dorothy looked around the hall, at the dragons laughing with station residents, at the young ones learning to cook, at Ashwing, who had gone from a lonely guardian to a bridge between two cultures. She thought about Gerald, who had believed that food could change the world one meal at a time. I will do it on one condition, Dorothy said finally. This is not about politics or research. It is about genuine connection. Anyone I train must understand that. No hidden agendas, no manipulation. Just honest friendship offered through shared meals. Sylvan agreed immediately. The council will support whatever structure you feel is best. Over the next month, Dorothy developed a training program. She called it the Grandmother's Protocol, though the official council name was the Cultural Exchange through Culinary Diplomacy Initiative. Volunteers came from across the galaxy to learn her methods. She taught them more than cooking. She taught them patience, how to observe without judging, how to listen even when you could not understand the language. She explained that every species had comfort foods, traditions around meals, ways of showing care through nourishment. Find those traditions, respect them, build from there. The first graduates of the program departed to make contact with isolated species. They carried Dorothy's recipes, her techniques, and most importantly, her philosophy. Early reports were promising. A hostile reptilian species had accepted fresh fruit from a trained volunteer. An isolated colony of insectoid beings had allowed researchers to approach after sharing fermented drinks. Dorothy continued teaching while maintaining her work on Drakenhold. The dragons were thriving. Young ones learned multiple languages. Older ones shared their history with eager students. Ashwing had become an official liaison between dragons and the Galactic Council, a position the Great Dragon took very seriously. One evening, Dorothy received a video call from Earth. Her daughter appeared on the screen, eyes wide. "Mom, you are famous. There are news reports everywhere about the grandmother ambassador who befriended dragons. My friends are asking for autographs. Your grandchildren think you are the coolest person alive." Dorothy laughed. "I'm still just making bread and soup, dear. You are changing the galaxy." Her daughter's voice softened. "Dad will be so proud of you." After the call ended, Dorothy sat quietly with a recipe book. She had added new pages, documenting dragon preferences and techniques she had learned from other cultures. The book was becoming something more than Gerald's legacy. It was becoming a bridge between worlds. Ashwing found her there, as the dragon often did during quiet moments. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" Dorothy asked. Ashwing sang a short melody, one the linguist had taught Dorothy meant, "You follow your heart. That is always right." Dorothy smiled and reached up to pat the dragon's scaled snout. "Tomorrow, I am teaching the new volunteers how to make your favorite stew. Will you help me?" Ashwing rumbled agreement. Together, they walked toward the kitchen, an elderly human woman and an ancient dragon, proving that the most powerful diplomacy sometimes came not from grand speeches or treaties, but from simple acts of sharing a meal. 2 years had passed since Dorothy Reed first baked bread on Drakenholt Station. She stood now before the Galactic Council's full assembly, thousands of representatives from hundreds of species, all gathered to hear her speak. Ashwing and 5 other dragons flanked her on the massive stage, their presence both honor guard and statement of unity. Dorothy wore her simple apron over formal clothes, a compromise with the council. She carried Gerald's recipe book, now worn and expanded with contributions from dozens of cultures. The book had become a symbol, featured in news reports across the galaxy. The council chairperson, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline form, addressed the assembly. We gather today to honor Dorothy Reed, whose simple approach to diplomacy has revolutionized our methods of first contact. 47 formerly isolated species have now joined the galactic community, all through the cultural exchange program she founded. Applause echoed through the chamber. Dorothy felt overwhelmed, but Ashwing's gentle rumble reminded her to breathe. Mrs. Reed, the chairperson continued, the council has asked you here to explain your methods so that others may continue this work. How did you achieve what trained diplomats could not? Dorothy approached the podium. She looked out at the sea of different beings, each one unique, each one capable of fear and loneliness and hope. I'm not sure I did anything special, she began. I just remembered something my grandmother taught me when I was young. She said that everyone, no matter where they come from, understands a warm meal and a kind word. Food is not just nutrition. It is memory, comfort, love made tangible. She opened Gerald's recipe book. My husband wrote in here that every recipe tells a story. When you cook for someone, you are sharing part of yourself. You are saying, I see you, I care about you, you matter to me. The dragons were not hostile because they were violent. They were hostile because they had been hurt and abandoned. They had forgotten how to trust. Ashwing sang a brief melody. The translation appeared on screens throughout the chamber. She saw our grief, not our anger. That is the key, Dorothy continued. Look past the defense mechanisms. Every species has them. Aggression, isolation, fear, they're all responses to pain. But underneath, we all share the same needs. Connection, understanding, a place at the table. An ambassador from a recently contacted species stood. But how do you know which foods to offer? How do you avoid giving offense? You ask, Dorothy said simply. You observe. You try different things and watch the reactions. Sometimes you make mistakes. I once gave Ashwing something too spicy, and the poor dragon breathed fire for an hour. But we laughed about it together, and that mistake taught me to be more careful. Mistakes made with good intentions can build trust faster than perfect execution. She spent the next hour answering questions, sharing stories from Drakenhold and from the many successful contacts made by her trained volunteers. She explained the importance of patience, of sitting in silence when words failed, of respecting traditions even when you did not fully understand them. Finally, the chairperson asked the question everyone wanted answered. Will you continue this work? Will you train more ambassadors? Dorothy looked at Ashwing, who had become not just her friend, but her family. She thought about the dragons thriving on Drakenhold, about the young ones learning to build relationships with other species. She thought about Gerald and how he had always believed that kindness created ripples far beyond what you could see. I will continue teaching, she said, but I'm also getting old. The real future of this program lies with those who learn from the dragons. They understand loneliness from both sides now. They know what it means to be feared and to overcome that fear. I propose that the dragons become co-teachers in the cultural exchange program. Ashwing's head lifted in surprise. The other dragons made questioning sounds. You have lived through isolation and reconnection, Dorothy said to them. You can teach others how to bridge that gap better than any human. You have patience measured in centuries. You understand the importance of honoring the past while embracing the future. Will you help me teach others? Ashwing considered this, consulted with the other dragons through their musical language, then turned to the assembly and sang. The translation came through clear and strong. We accept this responsibility, in honor of old friends and new ones. in hope that no species should suffer the loneliness we endured. We will teach what Dorothy has taught us, that connection is possible, that patience is powerful, that a shared meal can change everything. The assembly erupted in approval. The council formalized the decision immediately. The cultural exchange program would expand, with dragons serving as co-directors alongside human coordinators. Dorothy returned to Drakenhold to find it had grown into a full diplomatic academy. Species from across the galaxy sent students to learn the grandmother's protocol. The ruins beneath the station had become a museum, carefully preserved by dragon guardians who now welcomed visitors with warmth instead of aggression. Her own quarters had expanded into a proper home. Her grandchildren had come to visit and decided to stay, fascinated by the work she was doing. They learned to cook alongside young dragons, creating the next generation of cultural ambassadors. Dorothy spent her days teaching, cooking, and watching the community grow. Every evening, she sat with Ashwing, sharing a meal and talking about the day's events. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, two old friends who no longer needed words to understand each other. One quiet night, as they shared vegetable soup under the stars visible through the station's dome, Ashwing sang a new melody. It spoke of gratitude, of how one act of kindness could echo across time, of how a simple loaf of bread had restored hope to an ancient species. Dorothy reached up and touched the dragon's snout gently. Gerald always said that the secret to a good life was feeding people and making them feel at home. I think he was right. She looked around at the thriving station, at dragons and humans and dozens of other species sharing meals and stories. Her recipe book sat on the table beside her, open to a new page where Silverscale had written the first dragon recipe ever adapted for other species to make. The book would outlive her, Dorothy knew. It would continue growing, adding recipes and techniques from every corner of the galaxy. Future generations would learn that diplomacy could be gentle, that understanding could start with something as simple as breaking bread together. Dorothy Reed had traveled to the stars to start over, to find purpose in her final years. She had found something greater, a family that stretched across species, a legacy written in recipes and shared meals, and the knowledge that kindness, patience, and a warm kitchen could change the universe one conversation at a time. Ashwing began to hum, a contented sound that resonated through the evening air. Dorothy closed her eyes and smiled, at peace with where life had brought her, grateful for every moment, every meal, every friend she had made along the way.